Welcome to the Love Mondays podcast. My goal is to bring inspiring and authentic guests on the show who can help everyone love their Mondays and every other day. I'm thrilled to introduce Garry Ridge, the former CEO and chairman of the WD40 company. Yes, that little blue and yellow can with the red top that's in almost every garage in the world. But Garry's path to leadership wasn't conventional. Born in Australia, he joined WD40 in 1987 and rose to lead the company, transforming not just the profits, but the culture itself. He's also the author of the boldly titled Any Dumbass Can Do It, a book that's as honest as insightful. He's collaborated with legendary thinker Ken Blanchard and created the unforgettable character of the soul-sucking CEO, which we'll talk about. There it is. This episode dives into lessons on leadership, learning, and letting go, with some wisdom from the Dalai Lama and Garry's mom thrown in. Garry, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, g'day, Ron. It's a delight to be with you. Thank you for inviting me along. And normally, Alec, the soul-sucking CEO, doesn't get such an early mention, but that'll feed his ego because, he has a very large ego.
Oh, I love it. I love it. We'll talk more about that. So my first question is all about helping people love what they do, finding more joy, fulfillment. So for anyone who maybe does not love Mondays and every other day, what's one or two things you would recommend that they can do?
Oh, easy. Number one is gratitude. We need to really understand the power of gratitude, and I think it's so important for us to. I'm grateful I woke up this morning, so then things can start. So I think gratitude is really important. The world is messy enough, and if we take a moment just to reflect and think about what we have in life. There are going to be struggles. There always are. There are going to be obstacles. There always are. There are going to be challenges. There always are. But at the end of the day, I often say life is a gift. Don't send it back unwrapped. So I think, again, gratitude is really important. And I think if people are thinking about an organization, an organization should be something you escape to, not escape from. So what are we doing within our organization to create a place where instead of people waking up on Monday and feeling ill, they're racing to the door because they know when they get to wherever they're going to go, they're going to feel and know they belong. They're going to feel and know they matter. And they're going to learn something new that day that will value them.
I love that. I love the gratitude practice. I start my day with writing 3 things I'm grateful for every single day. And it becomes a habit that slowly starts working, right? It's not on day one you're going to feel a massive change, but over time, it starts putting you in a different mindset. And as you said, I'm grateful I woke up today. I'm grateful for my cup of coffee. It doesn't have to be something grandiose. And then what about those people who are maybe in a culture where they're a little bit lower on the organizational chart and they can't control the leadership narrative? What advice would you give them? Would you say, hey, keep writing your gratitude journal? Or would you say, at what point do people look for different environments?
Well, we deserve to be happy. And if they're working in an environment that's, not the C-suite or whatever, they're still working in an environment. So I wouldn't give up initially. What can you do in the circle that you can influence to make your department even better? What can you do in your circle of influence to make, the location that you're at even better? But, gratitude is really what it's about. It's funny, as you mentioned, I'm from Australia, and I actually do listen nearly every day to Australian radio when I'm taking Max, the wonder dog, down to Animal Keeper to play. I have it's amazing now. I can be driving my pickup truck and listening to an overnight live radio show from Sydney. And I was listening to something yesterday that I found really intriguing is, why wouldn't we, in our circle of friends, ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, tell us where they are today? Are they, and if anybody is ever less than 5, why wouldn't we call them up and say, "G'day, Ron, what's on your mind? What can I do to help you? Is there any way that, I can make your day a little bit better?" And in fact, I tested this out with my son last night. My son is an executive with Adidas, and there's a lot going on at the moment. I played golf with him on Monday, and I texted him last night. I said, "Hey, Pete, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you?" And he came back. He said, "Dad, I'm a 3." And that immediately triggered me to say, text me the 5 things you're grateful for right now. And he did. and he was grateful for his family and, a short work week and a few other things. And it kind of clicked his mindset a little bit. So I think we can be even more intentional helping people, you know, and be brave enough to ask them where they are and then be kind enough to get alongside them because we need to help people.
Yeah, I love that. And it reminds me of the Dalai Lama quote that was a light bulb moment for you. Can you share that quote?
Yeah. Yeah. The quote is attributed to the Dalai Lama. Our purpose in life is to make people happy. If we can't make them happy, at least don't hurt them. And, that quote came to me back in 1999, I think it was. I was on a Qantas 747 flying from Los Angeles to Sydney, 38,000 feet over the South Pacific Ocean. I remember it so clearly. And as you do when you're on flights, you read stuff. And I read it and I went, wow, if I could just live by this, wouldn't that be something? Now, I must admit, I try very hard. I'm not sure I've always been able to achieve it, but it certainly wasn't intentional.
Yeah, like, I think about many of the CEOs who I've worked for or with, and I've got some phenomenal CEOs who kind of live and breathe your way, but it's very hard when you're making tough business decisions and sometimes tough personnel decisions to have that goal. So I absolutely love it and admire it. So how did you live by it in those tough times?
I think the foundation that made it a little easier within the organization was that we had a clearly defined hierarchical set of values that were our guiding light, our North Star on how we all made decisions within the organization. And, sometimes we had to make tough decisions, but because we relied on our values to help us make those decisions, we could share, hey, we're making this decision. Our number one, value is we value doing the right thing. And we had a definition, as you know, in the book of what that means.
Yeah.
So even though it was a hard decision, people, in most cases, accepted it because they knew we made the decision based on a predetermined, agreed set of values in the organization. So I think one of the things I would truly recommend to people listening to us today in organizations is number one is you have to have a clearly defined purpose. Why are we getting up every day? And you've probably heard me say, imagine a place where you go to work every day, you make a contribution to something bigger than yourself. That's your purpose. You're protected and you're set free by a compelling set of values. So values in an organization are not restrictive, they're freeing. You learn something new, so again, you learn something new, which is really important, and you go home happy. And, even that one statement, the elements of that, if we were to work on putting systems in place in organizations and behaviors that created those outcomes, we would have a very, very successful organization.
Yeah, I love it. And even taking back to your comment on how you asked your son on a scale of 1 to 10, I mean, I think that's a brilliant question for your team.
Yeah.
To understand where are they at coming, and is there something on the personal side, on the professional side that maybe isn't right, and how can you as a leader help get that to a better place? I mean, I think that's a powerful question. So I do want to come back to your background because you've always described it as unconventional. Can you just kind of walk us through how you ended up in that CEO chair and maybe the unconventional path that led there?
Yeah. Well, how I ended up there, that's a good question. I think the principle behind it was something my dad, he shared with me when he was alive and when I was a young guy going into business. He said, get in the game, play your best game every game, and there's a chance you'll get picked on the A team. And I said, that's pretty good advice. And Dad also said, a fair day's work for a fair day's pay, and a man's word is a man's bond. So anyhow, yeah, I grew up in Sydney, Australia. I went to Drummoyne Boys High School. I left school at 16. I went to and worked for a retailing organization called Waltons. I was a management trainee there. I completed their management trainee program. It was I think it was a 4-year program. I then was offered a role with a wholesaling company that happened to sell WD40, funnily enough. And I worked for them for a while as a sales guy, out on the road, driving hundreds and thousands of miles a month from one town to another. And through that, I met the people at Hawker Pacific, who were the licensee for WD-40. And eventually they asked me to joined them, and I did some more educational work. I did some work in marketing, and I got a certificate in wholesale retail distribution. And having met the people at WD40 at Hawker Pacific, I got to meet the people at WD40 in the United States. And in fact, I was at Hawker Pacific and actually ended up as managing director of their consumer products division over a few number of years. And they had so I used to come to the United States to attend the WD-40 sales meeting, and that's where I met the president and the chairman of the company at that stage. I think my big moment of awareness was we were at the sales meeting, traveling back from Tijuana, where we'd been down for a very, very fine evening, and I led a tour bus singing "Tie Me Kangaroo Down" Sport as an Aussie. So I guess a lesson there is don't be afraid to get up and show you around. And the chairman of the board was on the bus that day, so I guess I imprinted his memory somehow or another. And then in 1987, WD-40 was starting to get serious about their global expansion. And even though they had sprinkles of business around the world, it was primarily a US brand. In fact, the first subsidiary it opened was in Canada, in Toronto. Was their first flurry into business outside of the United States. But they decided they wanted to develop their business in Asia Pacific. And I got a call one day from the president of the company. He said, "G'day, Gary, this is Jerry. This is a confidential conversation. We're thinking about expanding in Asia Pacific. And we're wondering whether you'd like to join us and open our subsidiary in Australia and help us build our business in Asia." Wow. I said to my dad, "What do you think about that?" He said, "You can't go wrong with that stuff, son." So Dad was right. So on July 4th, 1987, we opened WD-40 Company Australia with a fax machine under my bed. That's how. And we pulled it up from the bootstraps. 6 months later, we had our offices, we had our people, and off we went. And I was doing that for a number of years. And in 1994, 7 years later, I was having a conversation with my then boss, the same guy. And I said, "Is there anything you'd like me to do? I can do some more work." He said, "Funny you ask. You want to come to the US and help us build our global business?" He said, you seem to have a passion for taking our brand to places no one wants to go to. Why don't you come and help me?" Oh, well, why not? And as my friend Whitney Johnson, who I mentioned in my book, says, great things happen in life when you truly disrupt yourself because you're challenged, you're fearful, you're enthusiastic, it's daunting, it's exciting. And I guess there's nothing that's probably more disruptive for a family than to pick up your toys and move from Sydney to San Diego, which is what we did. And then 3 years later, he retired and I got to be CEO. And 25 years later, I stepped down and now I'm chairman emeritus. And we built, with the help of a lot of people, a great company.
Yeah, congratulations. I do I do want to give credit to Paul Tonnet, who's the Canada general manager, and he, we were just having a conversation, and he said, "Ron, I know you study leadership. You have to research Garry Ridge." And shortly after you published your book, so we were able to connect. So it's amazing how I didn't say anything to Paul, didn't know anything about you, and he came up and said, "This is one of the best leaders and best cultures I've ever been part of." And I think that's a testament, and probably something you really relish in is like you put in a lot of hard work to develop this culture along with everybody else, and it's coming back to you as well.
Yeah. I think that, our real role as a leader is to help those we have the privilege to lead step into the best version of themselves and go home happy. And, I've said many times in the last year and before that I think business has a responsibility and an opportunity to make a positive difference in the world. And unfortunately, and the Gallup research proves it, where only about 69%, about 31% of people in organizations are actually engaged in what they do.
Yeah.
And really, we should be very, very ashamed of that. Very, very ashamed. And it's caused by bad leadership. Now, what I've come to learn, Ron, is that most leaders don't understand they're executing bad leadership. They don't understand that their behavior is affecting people in certain ways. And now, in my current part of life, My purpose is I help leaders build cultures of belonging where love, forgiveness, and learning inspire a happy, more connected world. And I'm currently coaching about 8 CEOs and C-suite leaders. And the first part of my coaching process is called awareness. And I go through a number of leadership behaviors, all based on the work of my dear friend, Dr. Marshall Goldsmith. And when I show them the reaction of those that they lead and say, hey, do you realize that your people think you are a bad listener? Or do you know they label you as a micromanager? They go, no, 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 no. I said, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. So why don't we pick 4 or 5 of these, bad behaviors, and why don't we work on them to transform your behavior as a leader, which will then impact those you lead.
Yeah, I love that. And so as you work with these folks, are they seeing engagement levels go up?
Well, they're seeing the performance of their team go up, and I haven't. I'm sure they're when they do their next pulse survey or whatever. I know I would give them a guarantee that they're going to see a change. Well, and I know in the groups, because during my coaching process, about 6 months into my work with the leader, I go back to the stakeholders and I interview them again, and in all cases, there's been a positive movement. Because of the awareness of, I don't want to be that leader. We talked about, this guy, right?
Yes, yes, yes. Tell us about this guy.
Well, this is Alec, or it could be a girl, or Alice, the soul-sucking CEO or leader of Fear Incorporated. And some of the behaviors that this person has are the ones that build toxic cultures. For example, they have a big ego. Their ego eats their empathy instead of their empathy eating their ego. They're a micromanager. They think they're corporate royalty. They like a fear-based culture. They're a master of control. They want to control everything. They're a know-it-all. They think they have all the answers, and they do, even the wrong ones. They don't value learning. They must always be right. They hate feedback, and they're not really that dependable. And those are the behaviors that create these toxic cultures. But if you've got an organization where you're a true servant leaders love and involve their people. They're always in servant leadership mode. They're expected to be competent, so they're continually learning. They're connected. They have a high emotional intelligence. Now, interestingly enough, sometimes you have to be deliberate about building your emotional intelligence, because some people aren't naturally connectors. But as a leader, you need to push yourself to be that connector. They love learning moments. I've talked a lot about, we don't make mistakes, we have learning moments. They have a heart of gold and a backbone of steel. So, leadership is a balance between being tough-minded and tender-hearted. They're champions of hope. They know micromanagement is not scalable. They do what they say they're going to do, and they absolutely treasure the gift of feedback.
I love it. I love it. And I think it's really great for leaders to go through that list of all these characteristics and say, are you embodying some of those or all of them? And then what's the opposite? And how do you lead with love and support and trust? And all these words, love is not a word that comes up a lot. And it's interesting. Howard Bahar, who we talked about as well, ex-president of Starbucks, he's the same. And I love what you said about heart of gold, backbone of steel, because it's not just about being nice. It's about, once you've established trust, once people know you truly care, you can have the tough conversations with people, right?
Absolutely.
So could you tell me a little bit more about, I think I get the heart of gold, but tell me about the backbone of steel a little bit.
Well, I often say no good deed goes unpunished. And, the backbone of steel is, and I'll reflect back on, the conversation we had about making decisions. If you've got a clearly defined set of values, you are expected, and your organizations expects that. You as the leader will sometimes have to make those hard decisions. And, a hard decision could be, no, we're not going to do X, Y, Z, or, hey, we're going to have to move this from that. But always having your people in mind. I remember, going through the Great Recession, as they called it, and, a lot of people were laying people off. We made a decision we weren't going to lay anybody off. However, we had to make a hard decision. And the hard decision was, it's better that all of us suffer a little than a few of us suffer a lot. So we all had to take, some sort of action to protect all of us during that period of time. And I think
Yeah.
there's a hard decision to make. And one of the things I'm very, very, very grateful for and proud of is in my time, 25 years leading the company, in any economic situation, we never laid a person off, which really sent a very, very secure message, offset by the fact that I often got the feedback that, we need more people. And I said, I will only allow us to have more people if we are confident that we can support them in good and bad times. And I think what some leaders do, they get out over their skis. Things are really good, so they ramp things up to a point where they're now at risk if something starts to slow down. And the only place they can go is to sacrifice the most valuable asset they have, which is their people.
Yeah, I love that. And that's very admirable. Like no layoffs in that 25-year period. So, what about folks who are maybe not delivering, not living up to the values? I assume you've had to let people go over time. They're not part of major layoffs. Is that the case or not? Not really.
Yeah, I would call it sharing them with a competitor. And again, that comes from having conversation. If people are not performing, they're not happy. Now, as long as the leader, as their coach, we've done everything we can to help them perform their best, apart from if they've, performed some act that was dishonest or whatever, that's not a question. But, if we've done our best and they're not performing, they're not happy. So let's help them be happy somewhere else. And, we've had that happen where, people, we've helped them move on to some place where they could be happy and be fulfilled from what they do. So yeah, we certainly had let people go who didn't appreciate or feel comfortable in our culture.
Amazing. One of the things that comes up repeatedly with your culture that you built is learning moments. So, can you tell us what that learning moment means, and tell us about the process you did to start building that culture? I think there's a contest involved here.
Yes, yeah. So I think we would all agree that one of the most disabling emotions is fear. And fear comes from the fear of failure. So if we have an organization where people fear failure, then they're going to do two things. They're either going to fake or they're going to hide in the organization. And they're not going to be prepared to step out there. So we said, well, let's get rid of the word failure. Let's talk about, instead of failure, what did we learn from the experience that we had? And how can we take that learning and use it to better the company? So the learning moment was born. And the definition of a learning moment is a positive or negative outcome of any situation that needs to be openly and freely shared to benefit all people. So great concept, nice theory. So I said, okay, from now on, we're not going to talk about failure and fear. We're going to just talk about learning moments. And I want you to share openly with everybody, your positive learning moment. What did you do that worked? And I also want you to share with everybody your negative learning moment. What did you try that didn't work? And this is going to be safe. You don't have to worry. And what I heard in the background was, well, sure. I mean, I'm not going to get in trouble if I, actually admit that I made a mistake. And, oh, yeah, right. So I said, okay, I have to build trust now. So we started a program and I said, all right, what I'd love you to do is I'd love you to email me or send me. And I think this was just when email was kind of starting to work, your learning moment every month. And I'm going to pick, a winner from this, and we're going to have a monthly prize. And at the end of the year, we're going to have a grand prize where, we're going to send the winner and their significant other around the world on a first-class trip to visit, the offices that we had then, which were primarily the UK, Australia. We had one in Malaysia. And the first month started, and I got very few. I thought, wow. So what did I do? I made heroes out of those few. Hey, Ron sent in this negative learning moment. Look what he learned and how, blah, 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 blah. Ron's a hero. Yay, Ron. Yay, Ron. Second month, I got a few more and I made heroes out of them. Hey. Third month, I got a few more and I made heroes out of them. So finally, the message got through to the organization that it was safe. And then as we got into it coming near the mid mark and the end of the program, I was getting hundreds of these a month from people that's a true example of building the change effort. You have to get cheerleaders. So, get your cheerleaders, make them heroes, and whatever. And then the learning moment became embedded in the organization, still is a very powerful, it's very common language. You would hear, hey, my learning moment was this. And people say it without fear. Now, interestingly enough, Ron, as a reflection, WD40, the product was born on learning moments. Back in 1953, the company was a fledgling little company in San Diego, probably 4 to 5 employees that specialized in making products that stopped corrosion and condensation. And there was a problem with the umbilical cord of the Atlas space rocket, and the chemists got together and started to mix up formulations to solve the problem. Formula 1 didn't work, 5 didn't work, 15 didn't work, 25 didn't work, 35 didn't work, 39 didn't work, but 40 did. And that's why it's named WD, water displacement 40th formula. It came out of the space race. So we were born, or the company was born on a series of learning moments. So I was able to also reflect on that later and say, look at that. If they'd given up at 39, we wouldn't be here today. I'm pretty happy 39 didn't work too, because I don't think WD39 sounds anywhere as good as WD40.
Yeah, no. And so how do you keep that alive? Like, I mean, you're not the CEO anymore, right? You're the chairman. And so how does Paul Tournay in Canada, or whoever's leading the US business, or Australia, how does that culture stay alive?
Well,
you're not in that role.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm chairman emeritus. I have nothing to do with the company now. And I made that decision clearly when I stood down. And the reason being is we have a very, very competent CEO in place now, Steve Brass, who had been with the company for, I don't know, 25 years. He understands and absolutely endorses the power of a great culture. So, he's taken the company forward from where I left off. I did my job for 25 years. It's his job now. So I have no right to be looking over his shoulder. He often says he's building on the legacy that we built around the culture, and he absolutely is. So they live it every day, and they continue. And if you go on the website, you'll see it's front and center. Culture is still if not the most important thing in the company, certainly a very important thing in the company.
Amazing. And so what else makes people want to go in on the Mondays? I mean, you talked about a place where people want to go. What other factors create that?
Well, I think I've mentioned them briefly, but there's a few very, very core things. One, is it a place where you feel like and are treated like you belong? So, you're in the organization and people are actually greeting you. How are you? What's on your mind? Do you feel like you belong? Secondly, is it a place where you feel like and through the behavior of leadership that you matter and that the work you do makes a difference? Very, very important. Thirdly, is it a place where you are seen as someone that the leadership wants to develop so you can be better? And that's why one of the other key things we did in the organization is we took out the word manager. We replaced it with coach. So you report to your coach, and the coach's job is to help you play the very, very best game you can. And that was an absolute amazing change. A great coach is committed to helping the player win, is brave, not protecting their own comfort zone at the expense of someone else's development. A great coach knows the game and what it takes to win. A great coach never, ever runs onto the field and takes the ball. I know in Canada, ice hockey is a big deal, right? I don't think you've ever seen the coach at a ice hockey game jump the fence, pick up the paddle, and try and score the goal. He's on the side or she's on the sideline. So you never run on the field to take the ball. You spend a lot of time on the sideline watching the play with one objective, is to identify how you can give feedback to the players about how they could think about playing a better game, or identifying areas where, hey, this is something you should think about. They add value to the player by providing that feedback. They never, ever go to the podium and take the prize. And they spend a lot of time in the stinky locker room building trust. That's where that, connection part comes in. So the other element is, do people feel like their leader is helping them win? Then the final thing is this a place of learning and choice? And choice means a set of values that set people free and allow them to make choices without, as my dear friend Ken Blanchard would say, quacking up the hierarchy trying to get the answer.
Yeah, now look, I've been in many corporate environments where people are quacking up and, kissing butt, whatever you want to call it. I absolutely love that coach analogy, and you're not running on the field, and you're giving people the opportunity to learn and grow and develop, and that's where people, as you said, your move from Australia to San Diego, amazing things happen when you jump out of your comfort zone. So it's you as a coach help people jump out of their comfort zone, but in a supportive way. I think that's helpful. And, one story that you told in the book that I found really great was there was a gentleman who was in one of your boardroom meetings and was not acting in character. Can you tell that story?
Yeah. And this is how you rely on on your values. I was in a meeting and there was someone in the room that long-term leader within the company that understood our second value about creating positive, lasting memories. And they were absolutely not creating positive, lasting memories in this meeting. And, it was one of those times when someone was actually sucking oxygen out of the meeting. You've been there. Yeah. So what do you do as the leader? Well, option one is you stop the meeting and say, Ron, that behavior is absolutely unacceptable in this room. Well, that may get his or her attention, but everyone else in the room thinks to themselves, when am I going to be publicly assassinated like that? So they shut down. Number two is you do nothing. And then everyone in the room says, well, we don't really live our values here, do we? This was a really ugly meeting and blah, blah, blah. Third thing is you act as the leader, as the coach. So when the meeting was coming to an end, I said to Ron, let's go for a walk. And we walked out of the building and I looked under a car and behind a tree and in a trunk of, trash can. And Ron says, what the hell are you doing? And I say, Ron, the you that I know and love was not in that meeting today. What's on your mind? What's getting in your way? How can I help you? And, we had a conversation. I said, because Ron, you live our value of creating positive, lasting memories, and you were not creating any. So we had a conversation. And, Ron had a bad morning, got up late, kicked his foot on the bed, got flipped off driving in the car, late for the meeting, sweaty when he got there. And all of that turned him, into this person he didn't want to be. He brought his leftovers to the meeting instead of his true self. So we had that conversation and, we had an awareness moment. He thanked me for caring enough to bring that to his attention. And we had a hug and, he went back in. He went back into the office and he went to a few of the people at the meeting and he said, hey, I'm sorry. I didn't. They said, we know. Are you okay? That's not who we are. Yeah. The next morning, I noticed a couple of people going to him, taking him some coffee and said, hey, hope you're doing well today. So there was an example of us living our values, demonstrating that we care about the person and doing it by using the values to have that on-ramp to the conversation.
I love that. So can you tell me a little bit more about what you learned from Ken Blanchard and Marshall Goldsmith? I mean, two absolute legends. One thing I loved about a lot of Marshall Goldsmith's videos that I've watched is he talks about receiving feedback, and he says two words: say thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And there's so many other lessons I could share, but what have you learned from those two amazing gentlemen?
Well, I think firstly with Ken, Ken is a very dear friend of mine. He's 85 years old now. I see him, on regular occasions, and I learned from Ken the power of servant leadership. Ken is the absolute. Ken believes God made no junk, and he says that forever. And he's someone who believes that you can bring out the best in others. He says not one of us is as good as all of us. And it's based on his values and, all of the work that, the Blanchard organization has done over the time, SL2, the SL2 program and whatever. So, Ken has definitely a heart of gold, but he does have a backbone of steel as well. But again, and Ken is the absolute includer. If you're having a conversation with Ken and there's you and 100 people in the room, the other 100 people don't exist. He's never looking over his shoulder, waiting for the next person or, for someone more important to you to talk to. So I think, it's again with Ken. With Marshall, Marshall is kind of a closet. I don't think he's a closet Buddhist, but he really believes in a lot of the Buddhist principles, I guess. And he says something that I think my greatest learning is: did you do what you thought was right? Did you do your best? If so, make peace with it and let it go. You can't hold on to those things all the time. And around feedback, his book, and I see it behind you there, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, is one of the best leadership. I use it in my coaching practice. I have my 3 or 4 copies over on my desk, my bookcase there. But it's one of the best practical. I was teaching at the University of San Diego for 16 years, and I used that as a text because it's so practical. So if there's a book you should read, don't read mine. Read What Got You Here Won't Get You There.
No, I would say read both of them. I think they're both very, very inspirational books. And one of the things you talked about is ultimate inclusion. And I know Simon Sinek's a person you mentioned a lot. And Simon tells a really cool story about Noah, the barista at the Four Seasons. And I don't know if you've heard that story, where just loved his job. Managers loved, helping people out. And the same person put their head down at a different casino, right? And it's a great story to show the power of leadership. And as you said, the privilege of leadership and what we have, which is often not lived out because of the pressures of quarterly earnings and, traditional old school methodologies. So this is so refreshing to me.
Yeah. Well, those pressures are always going to be there. The thing that I think a lot of leaders miss or CEOs miss is, if you have a highly engaged, effective culture, getting the quarterly earnings is not that hard.
Yeah.
And here's why. You can have the best strategy in the world. Let's write a strategic plan. Let's have it's very clear. We know our end market. We know, how to make the end user aware. We know where we want to go. We know the market size. Great. 70 out of 100 for your strategic plan. But if only 30% of your people go to work every day and are effectively, enthusiastically executing against that plan, 30 times 70 is a number. But if 80% of the people are, 80 times 70 is a much bigger number. So the end result is, it's the will of the people times strategy equals outcome. And most people get discombobulated in spending not enough time on the will of the people. Now, we could talk about WD40 and say, we had this great place to work and it was all for, were we successful? We had a compounded annual growth rate of total shareholder return of 15% a year. We took the market cap from 300 million to 3.6 billion. We expanded to 176 countries around the world. We would never have been able to do that if we didn't have high will of the people. So, when I hear people say, it's the pressure of the quarter. Well, we're actually here to deliver, right? So why are we not doing what we should do to empower and enthusiastically, have our people who are the asset to deliver be their best? Duh, I don't get it.
No, and I love it. And it just shows the power of servant leadership. It's about being great to your people and delivering results. It's not or, it's and. And I see it very clearly. If you have a very engaged staff, a team, the results are going to be much better. And so again, it's such a great way because it pays back. I absolutely love it. And
not only that, here's where the real gold is. You're going to send people home happy.
Yeah.
And happy people build happy families. Happy families build happy communities. And happy communities build a happy world. And no one will disagree with me that a little happier world might be a good thing. So not only are we delivering on results, we're making a positive difference in the lives and families of others.
That's amazing. And look, I've been doing training and workshops and speaking for the last 4 years. So I'm very happy in what I do. But before that, I spent 20 plus years in finance and accounting roles. And finance and accounting folks, the culture is all a little bit like suck it up, do it for the team, have fun. And now whenever I speak to any finance individual or team, I said, no, we're going to do great finance, great business, and have fun. And so it's one of those things that there's this, we often fall into these boxes, right? Finance, accounting, it's boring and suck it up and nights and weekends, do all this nonsense, which to me makes no sense. But I'm an example, and you probably got so many other examples. Once the box was taken away, I can be who I want to be. I can be intentional. I can make choices to come in and have a positive impact, right? So absolutely love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. One of the chapters I love, I think it's called "Even the Queen Has to Sit to Pee." And then I love the story of you telling whenever you went to visit your mom and how she helped ground you. Can you expand on that a little?
Yeah. Yeah, my mum lived till she was 99 years and 9 months old, and she was the queen of unconditional love, which if I convert that into business, it's giving feedback. When I moved to the US, I traveled back to Australia regularly, always around her birthday. And as she was aging, she was in her 90s, I'd call her up and still in the family home that we had for 72 years. And I'd call her up and say, hey, Mum, I'm coming to visit. And she said, when will you be here, Garry? And I'd tell her and blah, blah, blah. Anyhow, I'd end up in Australia and always I'd arrive early in the morning and she'd have the kettle on the stove making tea. And, Garry, would you like a cup of tea? No, Mum. Bang, you got it whether you wanted it or not. Would you like some breakfast? No, I had it on the plane. Bang, you got it whether you liked it or not. And she would go around the other side of the table and she would, be there in her nightie. She used to wear a white nightie. She'd have a pink gown on, a little beanie on her head. She wore glasses. Of course, she'd adjust her glasses and she'd say, now, Garry, there's something we need to talk about. And she would then give me unconditional love, which was, your Auntie Mari was in hospital. You didn't send her a get well card. Your nephew won his soccer game final. Why didn't you call him? And all this stuff. And in true, as Marshall says, say thank you. When your mum's 97, there's only two words that you say, yes, Mum, yes, Mum, yes, Mum. But that whole thing was about, really grounding. Mum, the Australian kind of culture is you cut people down if they get too big for your boots. We call it the tall poppy syndrome, and we do it in a very caring, loving, but sometimes pretty in your face sort of way. And that chapter was really the naming of it was, even if you're the Queen of England, you do go to the bathroom. And that gets us pretty bad. And when I was naming the chapter, I thought, oh dear, how's people? But it's really when you read the chapter as you have, the essence of it. But she was a great teacher, and I still have the tea cup and the saucer here in my house. I have it on the shelf. I look at it every day, and it reminds me that don't get too big for your boots. We need to understand that we're all equal.
We're all people, right? I love that lesson, right? And it's against the your ALEC there, where put the ego aside. It's about people. It's about coaching, and then the other word you use a lot is tribe, right? Tell me a little bit about that.
When I was putting the whole framework together, as I've shared with you, belonging is so important, and that really came from Maslow's hierarchy to self-actualization. In an organization, the first two rungs are really, am I safe, secure, and do I have what I need to live? The third one is love and belonging. And I thought, my goodness, what do you belong to? You belong to a family, a clan, a tribe. You don't belong to a team or an organization. You participate in those. And then I started to study some of the attributes of tribalism, going back to, Ugg the caveman, right? Ugg the caveman was a tribe member, and society is built on tribalism. We start off in little groups that support each other. So calling the organization a tribe was no disrespect to any indigenous group. It was reflecting on the actual attributes of tribalism. One of the main attributes of tribalism was learning and teaching. And if you had a tribe leader who wasn't a continual learner and didn't then teach the tribe members, Imagine you're in Ugg the caveman's tribe, and to survive, you had to take the big Ugg the caveman, weapon, and learn to use it to catch, the food. If you didn't train your other tribe members to do that, then the tribe would end up going extinct. So I love the fact that I could talk about, if you're a tribe member here, number one, we'll have a just cause. And our just cause was a group of people that come together to protect and feed each other. That was the just cause of the tribe. And if you're a tribal leader, your number one responsibility is to be an always learner and an always teacher. So by having the tribe, there was something people could belong to. It had a just cause, and I could emphasize to the leadership group what their role was. Now, there are other attributes, of course, in a tribe. We had values, we had celebration, we were warriors, there were specialized skills, we were future focused. All of these attributes I could talk about and say, well, why aren't we looking to the future now? What are we doing to innovate in the company? Because as tribes, if we don't look to the future, we'll go extinct. And are we celebrating? We need to celebrate. And do we have a warrior spirit or not? And our values was the number two thing. And how are we working within the values? So calling the group a tribe, somewhere to belong, and some meaningful attributes that you could point to and hold people accountable to.
Absolutely love it. Garry, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to share with my listeners that maybe we haven't covered?
Well, we could Ron, it's lovely to be with you. We could sit and chat about this forever, couldn't we? But maybe they can buy the book and get the full journey on it. And as you probably know, I have a quiz on my website. If you go to my website, www.thelearningmoment.net, you could take the dumbass quiz, and the higher your score, as being a proficient dumbassery, the better leader you are, because I am the dean of dumbassery.
Absolutely love it. This has been so refreshing, Garry. So thank you very much for taking the time. And I love the continued learning, the continued growth, the continued teaching. Keep it up. I absolutely love it.
Thank you. And thank you for what you do, because it's people like you getting this out there and sharing it that will make a positive difference in the world. So you are making a difference. And for that, I am grateful.
I really appreciate that, Garry. Have a great day.